480 acres from the Dows family. It was in two distinct parcels or tracts. About 300 acres was located or is located adjacent to the county's Squaw Creek Park and one of the city's golf courses. That was really the target. That was the target for the county. They wanted to acquire those acres for conservation purposes and to expand the footprint of Squaw Creek Park. From a package deal with the family and with the Dows family and with the county, the additional 179 acres, which is what we'll be looking at this afternoon, came along with the package. It was the county's intention from the very beginning that it would divest non-strategic conservation lands for development purposes. That's the 179 acres that we're looking at. So this really provided the county with the really unique opportunity, because it's under county ownership, to guide development in a manner that we believe would really check off all the boxes with the county's comprehensive plan in terms of providing development that protected our environmental resources, that protected agricultural land, but at the same time provided a range of housing opportunities, multi-generational housing opportunities, a range of price points for our residents. Also, from the standpoint of an energy strategy, we will be looking at energy and stormwater management guidance documents as part of this development. So the county really thinks that this provides a unique opportunity for a new product, a new type of development. We think there's a strong market for. It's a purposeful community. It's a community that creates experiences for those that will live there, great connections to trails. So we see a lot of opportunities with this site, with this land, and with this project. So I'm going to turn it over to Dennis. Let me make one more introduction before I forget. Mr. Cotton. Oh. We cannot forget Mr. Cotton, Dennis's shadow. So if you haven't met Mr. Cotton yet, please do at some point.
Dennis, just a moment. Can folks in the back hear okay? Because we do have a microphone. Everything's good?
Oh, good. That makes it easier. Thanks for checking. And he's not for me, though I do really enjoy his presence, but between meetings and things like this, we'll stop in at hospitals and we do therapy work with patients. So he happened to be along with me today, so that's why he gets to wear his vest and join us as well. So feel free to pet him. And Frank was involved as well.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Frank?
Frank is right here.
I'm so sorry you weren't here. So Frank Bellon, our former director of the development for Skogman Homes. Frank wears a multitude of hats on this project. So Frank, as a developer, been involved in development for, should I say 40 years? Is that a fair statement? Close. So he's familiar with the local market, familiar with with the development processes, working back and forth between city and county. Frank also sits on our Planning and Zoning Commission. So at some point, this development will come in front of Frank as a Planning and Zoning Commissioner. And Frank also sat on our core planning team that worked with Dennis and a group of others in terms of putting together this concept plan. So thank you, Dennis, and my apologies, Frank.
Thanks. How are you?
We had all the kinks figured out.
We had it all.
We waited too long.
Let's see. Something logged out. You want to escape it? All right. There we go. Yeah, there we go. Yep, that'll work. All right. So, the overriding goal is how do you work with this resource, a very quality resource to create something that has economic value and contributes to the quality of life in Linn County. And you do it through the preservation and enhancement of both the natural environment as well as recognizing the heritage of farming that was on the site. And these were some of the consultants involved. The agricultural consultant was really interesting to learn a lot about how you farm at 35 or 40 acres and make a living and be sustainable economically as well as environmentally. And we had several people on our core team that talked about that. So the challenge again, create a vision and a design framework that builds excitement and consensus towards this idea of a development that integrates this range of development on a historic farm and preserves the natural environment. The 180 acres, and this is kind of a summary of what Les just went through in terms of how can this really contribute to the quality of Linn County. So these were some of the people involved. The advisory committee, again, Frank was on here. We have other members of the advisory committee that are in the room. It was, I think all of us enjoyed learning from each other about our various aspects of expertise. I've talked about process a lot. It's kind of like an Olympic athlete. It helps us all. It's like training for an Olympic athlete. We're not all going to be Olympic athletes, but if we train, we're going to be better than we are today. And so process is the same way. It allows all of us to work at a team at a higher level of efficiency and quality, and takes advantage of all of our strengths. So what's key to it is before we jump to ideas, we gather the facts, we understand what the goals are for the project, and we understand what the needs are in the marketplace, and we let those three things drive ideas. And usually it's backwards. Everybody comes to a meeting and I have an idea. So it's hard for people to kind of take the time to take the three steps before we get to ideas. It's a strategic location, if you're not familiar with it, Mount Vernon Road, just west of Highway 13. There's the site at the top. It has about a fourth of the rectangle is on that south edge on Mount Vernon Road. Squaw Creek runs along the eastern edge of it, and Dows Farm Road on the west. And you can see on the left, it's mostly 2/3 is currently field crop, and the upper third is pasture, and they also let the cows run in the woodlands and the streams, and not as degraded as I thought I was going to see when I did get in there. It was a fairly small amount of cattle that was grazing in there. The farm is in the middle on the left, and then Squaw Creek on the right, and the new development that happened, that was about 2005 on the upper right, Squaw Creek. The topo, so sometimes it makes it look even more crazy than it is, but actually ideal slopes on the southern 2/3, but then when you get to the hilltop, it drops off steeply. We did an exercise of what words would describe success, and the group there was very much diverse, but yet in consensus in terms of what does this project really want to be: sustainability, social equity, and connecting and diversity, these types of things, kid-friendly. You can read it as much as I can. But it was really interesting. Probably spent a good hour or two going through these words and evaluating them and making sure those were appropriate goals. How do you organize green space on the site so that it really responds to those natural systems? And how do you respect the original farmstead? Just cute as a button, even the little windmill and the barn and the holding area. So these were some of the facts for the site. Again, in orange and red, you can see the steep slopes. Those are 25% type slopes, really too steep to build roads unless you really do some really aggressive chopping the hilltops off. The riparian systems and the watersheds that feed into Squaw Creek. The fragile environments in terms of the woodlands and the karst soils. Began to identify some potential vehicular entrances based on traffic studies and planning principles. The green tells us, as a real estate developer, what's most valuable. What's most valuable is the frontage usually, and for land that backs up to the natural environment. And then the red and orange really call out a combination of a lot of these factors and say, these are some limitations for development that You could develop there, but it'd be really harmful for those environments or really expensive.
So there's red is no, and then the yellow is caution or something?
Yes, right, yeah. Yep. So we also looked at some benchmarks, and Frank, were you guys involved in Timberlake when you were like younger? No? No, there was a different one. But we looked at some benchmark projects around to learn from them too. What's working, what maybe hasn't worked as well as we thought it would. Timberlake, large lot, single family. Developed quite a while ago, still has empty lots in it, but some of it's developed. Prairie Crossing has been in place now outside of Chicago for, a good 10 years or more. One of the earliest examples of integrating farming, agricultural with the neighborhood. It was a way of adding value to this land. Jackson Meadow is, that's my house on the upper left. It's a cluster development, so it's 300 acres that 30 families share. And if you decide to mow your yard, you'd probably get kicked out of the neighborhood because no one does that. It's all prairie grasses. We have parties when we burn off the prairie in the spring. And then Serenbe Community, which is the most recent example of an agri-community outside of Atlanta, where the ribbons of development wrap around natural environments as well as around farming and activity. And the basic concept of the agri-community is that in the 70s and 80s we did golf courses to create value in the land. Nowadays we don't have so many golfers, but we have a lot of people that are passionate about nature. And also we have a lot of people who grew up around farms but can't have that experience anymore, and they want to live near a farm and have a farming experience. So farming and nature are the equivalent of golf courses from the 70s and 80s. And there's some good studies even that talk about trail systems and interacting with some of these agricultural and natural systems. So again, some of the goals that talked about managing the natural resources, actually enhancing them through management, and also showcasing some of the natural riparian environments through some development. High quality community space, exploring a range of housing types so that when my kids get out of college, which they've been out of college now 5 or 10 years, they could afford to live here, I could afford to live here. My parents who kind of run out of money, they could afford to live here. There's a whole range of sort of demographics that could be a part of this community. Connecting trails. The idea of using it as a showcase for small-scale agricultural practices that are environmentally friendly came up in our process. I think it's really exciting. So we came up with 3 concepts. We purposely looked at what if it's mostly a working farm. The other concept was what if it's mostly nature, and the third one is what if we mostly try to maximize the economic return. And interesting enough, working with some of the specialists in agriculture, we found out we could do it with a lot less agricultural land than we originally thought. And so we took the best of all 3, and what winds up is that about half of the site is set aside for conservation, and that's along the eastern portion of the site. Some of that's floodplain, and some of it's just sensitive riparian environments. And then about 1/4 of it is set aside for the working farm. So it may even be less than 43 acres. We may be able to get down to 40 or 35 and still be viable. But that took advantage of some areas where we could have pasture land, specialty root crops. We explored the short little cows, wasabi cows I think they're called, or something like that. I don't know. I'm still learning. But it was really fascinating what can make money and be sensitive to the environment on an acreage of, say, 40 acres. And so then the remaining 1/4 is development.
What was the cost for, if you would associate for that whole 180-acre tract at purchase price?
I don't know if I can have an answer off the top of my head because it was lumped into a bigger price. But let's talk about that when we do the Q&A.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it does drive, and we've had this discussion, it drives how much development needs to occur on the remaining 1/4 of the land in order to make economic sense on the value of the overall land purchase.
Where is the farm?
So the farm, let's go with this. So the farm remains intact. This is pasture land, and we talked about it. It may be more native grasses that are appropriate for grazing. Some sites that are good for vineyards or orchards. Some area here for crop, perhaps root crops is one of the most successful. My apologies, I just went backwards. We also explored some notions of nursery operations, orchard, pecan groves, all different varieties, so that's still under discussion. So it kind of wraps around his fingers. I'm going to show you a diagram that will help that. So we wanted to combine the best practices of nature conservation, low impact development strategies with the best practices for small scale organic farming and integrate it in a new urbanist development. So the irony is here, in order to save the natural systems, in order to have an operating farm that respects our heritage, we wind up with a very small piece of land to develop. So that tends to say new urbanist strategies, which are compact and very efficient and have very limited amounts of roadways and infrastructure, are the most responsible way to develop it within the economic parameters and still preserve these other systems. So I think I've already said pretty much all those things. I'm going to keep going to keep us on time. So these are the diagrams these are the fundamental principles that the drawing on the left, that's going to evolve and the product types are going to change based on the market. But these principles will hopefully always drive decisions. So the circles are a 5-minute walk, and that typically defines neighborhoods. And so we really have 4 neighborhoods that are residential, a 5th one that's a farm-based neighborhood, and then a 6th one up here, which is really mostly grassland with a small cluster of homes right here. Open space, so the dark green are the farming operations, so it's maybe a little easier to see there. The lighter olive green is the nature conservation area. And the other greens are green space systems, parks, sometimes just merely lawns that help link and create a continuous system. And in fact, this notion of green fingers that interlock and connect to the natural environment as well as to the farming. So you're never more than a city block away from a natural environment or a farm. And you can sit in your front porch and say, yeah, I'm part of that. Public corridors, so often these natural features are cut off by private homes. In this case, they're always visible as well as physically accessible. Walkways and pathways with destinations. And I think this pathway, which has a regional implications, is a tremendous asset for the community. And then again, the land use allocation. I'm going brief because I want to leave plenty of time for the panel. This brought us through to an open house that we had back in April. And then since then, we've been gathering more information on market and on traffic and continue to study it. And we want to continue this plan to evolve so that it's a winning concept for everybody involved. Neighbors, people that have been involved in various multiple ways. And part of the scope will be developing guidelines and how we really guide the implementation. It will take a number of years to develop. I'll do this briefly. This is just a recent study I did this week that said if the property was developed per the existing zoning or code, on the right is one scenario that would be very typical. Almost twice as many streets, that's twice as much hardscape, twice as much, we heard all the nasty things about pavement. The orange are the woodlands that are protecting the edges of the riparian valley. Those would be at risk, because those would be, even if you're like my folks, the developer says, I'm going to sell you a wooded lot, and within 2 years, you've managed to kill all the trees on your wooded lot because the contractor did that, and you put weed killer on the lawn and all sorts of things. And in fact, here's some bullet points to talk about. So the orange are woodlands that are probably either destroyed or at risk. Significant pavement that contributes to lots of things that are not desirable, and very limited access for homeowners as well as visitors in the community. And the red indicates those steep slopes we saw earlier. So the most likely scenario would be that the hill gets chopped off and the dirt gets moved and filled into the valleys. And so lots of changes in terms of the land in that regard to get those lots to work and those roads to work.
And could you just point out on the perimeter what the streets are?
Yeah.
I think we would feel more comfortable in
Yeah.
knowing where it is.
I should have done that sooner. So this is Mount Vernon Road. The Lighthouse Restaurant is kind of a landmark that's right here. You know, it's not very visible, but there is a utility easement that runs right through the middle of it. You might see it out near the middle of the field. This is Squaw Creek Road and Squaw Creek Development. This is Dows Farm. There's a trucking company that's in, this used to be a school. And the word is they may be leaving that, so that may be a nice asset for the community. So Dows Farm comes up and kind of wraps around. And then Highway 13 is just off the page to the right. I think it's a quick trip or come and go.
The North Road is Cottage Grove Road, wasn't it?
Yes, Cottage Grove, it turns into Cottage Grove up here.
That north side is where the rest of the land was purchased.
Yes, so that rest of that land is right up in here. There's a private ownership that has really done a really nice job of managing and creating some natural environments here as well. So, and I think that's, if I kind of hit the high points, that's another, that's a good enough information. We'd like to, I think, Bill and David and Frank, anything?
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. First of all, any last or questions, immediate questions for Dennis before we get into
Just in terms of timing, you know, in terms of where we are.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to discuss that in terms of, you know, you have a bunch of action steps that were shown on the slide.
Yes.
And I just was curious, are we weeks away or months away or years away?
Not years. So we're in the fairly early stages of phase 2. So we just got a preliminary market study back, and we're still going through that, be sure we understand it. We got a traffic study just got back. Seems pretty straightforward. We want to be sure we understand it. We'll start doing some more detailed utility analysis, and then most of those other action steps will start happening in January, February, March. Sometime this late spring, early summer, we'd like to have the project to a point where it's available for developers to provide proposals to see if they want to be a joint partner with the county in the development process.
So the county will not be the developer, so that the county will issue requests for proposals to developers to develop, and we're still working out the phasing aspects of it as well. We're sort of anticipating maybe an overall development management, but identifying different phases for development. So we would issue RFPs to developers who would then acquire and develop land in conformance with the development guidance documents that then prepared.
You know, there's a range of products, so some developers would want to do one product but not another. So you want to be sure you have the right developer doing the right product. That's why you might have more than one developer involved. Or maybe there's a master developer that partners with people that like doing these types of products.
To that end, is there like a building standard that you would have so that if you've got different builders that
Yes.
are looking like siblings more than?
Yes, that's really critical. To me, that's one of my biggest challenges, is the design guidelines that make sure that the vision is delivered and it's high quality, and that there's not sort of always, oh, we're going to make an exception and suddenly something doesn't look consistent with the quality of that neighborhood and what we're trying to establish as a brand. Sometimes they can be really simple. The Jackson Meadow example I showed you, which is the White House, is where I have a residence up there. It was a handful of things that they said. The houses couldn't be any more than 24 feet wide. They all had to be white, and they all had to have a 12-12 pitch on the roof. And those 3 things alone makes that neighborhood feel like it all belongs together. when we write design guidelines that are 120 pages thick, it gets very hard for people to sort of implement them and stay true to them, and they become overly complex and burdensome. So there's a happy medium in there. That's a really critical aspect of the project.
Are you guys considering any like sustainable design into that stuff, like geothermal or like LEED certification for the
Yeah,
houses?
I'll answer that, and then let's let the other folks make a few comments, and then so we can all four kind of answer questions. I'm working with Modus, which is a consultant that's really into renewable energy strategies and energy management strategies. So we're exploring lots of those things, like is there opportunity to have a shared geothermal, for instance. And certainly the design guidelines could have something very simple as referencing that it has to perform to a certain LEED standard, whether it's a building performance or a neighborhood standards that LEED establishes, or other building code standards that with certain energy requirements. So I think we'll have a document that starts to say we really want this to perform, be a high performance project on all levels in terms of responsible use of energy as well as responsible protection and enhancement of the environment.
All right, so let's get our panelists, if you want to just bring your chairs up front. So turn them around so you can face the music. So I want to start with Bill, if you don't mind, Bill. Sure. So again, what I really want, what I'd really like each of the panelists to address would be what they see as challenges and opportunities for this rather unique product to Linn County and to the area. And again, in Bill's role with the city of Cedar Rapids, and knowing that the city would be involved in the review and approval process, can you give an overview of the city's land use plan, how this fits or doesn't fit with that, some of the challenges and opportunities working with the county on this project?
Sure. As Les mentioned earlier, the city has review and approval authority within a 2-mile area surrounding the city limits, and that's granted via state code. And so as a result, our future land use plan, envisions CR as the city's comprehensive plan, in that our future land use policies that are outlined. And so something that I think about in relation to this is how do our land use policies interact with the county's land use policies. So if you look at this area from the context of the city, it's in a land use typology area titled Urban Reserve. And so the primary concept is reserving that space for future growth. City services, water, sewer are available in close proximity to the site. They could be hooked up to. As a result of that, you have seen some development pressure over the years. There's a number of developments that have popped up on Rosedale, and the one that Les and Dennis pointed out. And so how do you then interact with the county's land use plan? From our perspective, again, at the city, it's an area where we know we will see growth long term. How do we manage that so that in the future we don't run into roadblocks as a result of development that has happened prior to the expansion of the urbanized area? So thinking about how many wells and septics, individual wells and septics are going in out there. That tends to cause some problems as the urbanized area expands. How do you, urban services are another thing. What's the impact on traffic? All of these things. And then from the county's perspective, when I worked there, this is considered a metro urban service area. So the county plan does a good job of looking at where development should occur throughout the county, as opposed to just within the city limits of Cedar Rapids or on the fringes. And so their system tends to drive development towards these types of areas that are in close proximity to the urbanized area, that have city services available. And that's where our two land use plans really meet. And so we've got this area, we know development will occur, and we're trying to manage what happens until it urbanizes. And then on the county side, you've got a system that tries to drive development to preserve agricultural land towards those areas. And so this is a good example of where those two are starting to meet. And so that's what I think about from my perspective in terms of challenges or opportunities. I think about if you think about this regionally, so at a city level, cities compete. And I say this a lot, some of you have probably heard me say this, cities compete for not only businesses, but population, for new residents. Regions also compete, and this is something I think it's a new product for our market. It exists other places, and they've done well other places, and I think this makes us as a region, and Cedar Rapids and Marion and other communities in close proximity, more competitive. It's another product that is attractive to a range of residents, which I think is a good thing. As far as challenges go, there's going to be some challenges in terms of some of the road designs that have been proposed as a part of the conceptual design. But again, all things I think that we can sort out. When there's new products, it forces you to start to think differently or reevaluate your policies. And if it makes good sense, then make some changes.
Thanks.
Let's maybe a good time to talk about from a planning and zoning commissioner standpoint, the land use. As a commissioner, you look at accommodating growth and respecting adjacent property owners' rights. Also, we're concerned about preserving quality farmland and maintaining a high quality of life. As a commissioner, I look at this, most recent concept, and it appears to fit well with adjacent neighborhoods. Offers quality housing, a wide range of incomes. Though it's not high quality farmland, but a portion of it, a large portion, is being preserved, and it also perpetuating the heritage of the site, which I really like. Keeping something to the past. It's positively impacts the neighborhoods. It has elements of conservation design and low impact development, and it seems to be respectful of site sensitive areas, which all good things from a standpoint. Also appears to comply with the rural land use planning, which we talked about, and it connects to trails. So I can't speak for the entire commission, but I would think we really support something similar.
Frank, with your development, your developer hat on from your previous work, in terms of the market potential for this type of product, because it's again a unique product. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm concerned about it. I think quite a bit of effort needs to be spent really looking at the feasibility of this type of approach.
Are there any of those approaches that have been used in Cedar Rapids where you got that variety of housing solutions and close to the proximity with that much better?
I haven't been involved
In Iowa?
in Cedar Rapids, or I pretty much worked Eastern Iowa.
There are a couple of examples.
Yeah,
The Prairie Hill Clubhouse in Iowa City would be one small example. And Johnson County is actually working on a concept plan on their core farm that incorporates working agricultural land with conservation protection with a mix of houses.
So
It is. No, the first one is built. The first one is under construction. Prairie Hill Clubhouse.
So it is all sold out, or is it developing?
is being sold. So there are units that are being sold. So, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to add that in terms of the mix of housing products, the Peninsula neighborhood in Iowa City is another good example of this type of development in which there are a wide range of housing products all mixed in together, and new urbanist design principles and that sort of thing. And we could talk about, I'm not an expert, but we could talk about a little bit anyway about how that's done over the years.
The Prairie Trail.
You just said the peninsula area, what is that, or where is it?
The Peninsula neighborhood is a development that is located in Iowa City, just to the south of I-80. Someone help me with the road.
It's not Park, it's north of Park, it's
West of Dubuque Street.
Just, off of Dubuque, just north of the new bridge, Park Road.
Kind of winds down towards the river to get to it. It's a good example. In my critical eye, they actually may have overdone it. They might have gotten too compact and too sort of, sometimes just 2 or 3 feet makes a difference between something feeling right and not. Prairie Trails in Ankeny has a diverse products and price points. It's been in place now it came on board in about 2006, and it continues to develop, but it has different price points in townhomes and such. So that'd be a good one. That's in Ankeny.
Well, that started in 2006, so we're in 2018, so it's taken 12 years to, and it's still not yet built.
It's very large. It's very large, and
How many housing units would it?
I don't know Prairie Trail, but it would have in the neighborhood of 2,000 or 3,000 dwelling units. And they started right when the residential market busted. So it's sat pretty quiet for a good 3 or 4 years. But they've seen a lot of construction over the past 5 years, I'd say. But these types of developments, it's a two-sided. They are unique, so that makes them more valuable because they're not a commodity. It's not something you can just go and get a 1/4 acre lot with no trees. On the downside, your buyer's market is a little smaller because there's some people that just don't want that. They want the 1/4 acre lot. That's what they're used to, and so it's a two-sided sword. But the overall effect in communities around the country, and I practice all over the world, is that it's very desirable because you can walk to destinations. Again, you can have your kids, your grandparents, someone that, a blue-collar worker can get to know someone who is a white-collar worker, and it's a very desirable sort of lifestyle.
So Dave, as a neighbor, why don't you sort of bullet point and summarize some of the issues that you're bringing to the table here?
Some of the concerns are just the extra traffic with that many housing units. If you had, is 1,000 people a reasonable number that could be out with that many housing units? So, you try to extrapolate how many cars that's going to be in the extra traffic. And so Block Creek Road becomes a limited access road for Dows. It goes up to Cottage Grove Parkway, so it's traffic there along with the traffic on Mount Vernon Road. And so you see some concerns there on what it would do to, we like to walk it, bike it, take our dogs out. So you got some concerns there. The mixed use along the highway we worry about, is that viable? Can that have a valuable retail commodity that's different than Nubo or what's going to drive people out there, that's going to seasonally keep people out there all the time? We look at the rising interest rate environment, and if you've got a 2.5% home mortgage, are you going to be really excited about moving out here, and then all of a sudden it's 5%? The school district, if you're people, this is just some feedback from realtors. When someone new comes into town, and if they show them Erskine, McKinley, and Wash, or they go out to Linmar, or they go out to Prairie, or they go out to Xavier, Erskine, McKinley, Wash is going to lose. And so we worry a little bit about how does the demand work, and then even if it works, does the school system have the capacity there? that's one of the concerns.
Dave, I wonder if you can show us where you live.
Can you take it back?
Yeah, I'll kick it back.
This is the Squaw Creek neighborhood that we live in. This is my house, it's 6 over. 40, 50 houses out there. We routinely walk this road around Auburn Road. So we go up in here and it's a panic burn. People look kind of in. Yep. Pat Barrett is lives here. Working executive. He walks this a lot. Dr. Parks, the horse doctor, has some property out in here, and he has people that pull in with horse trailers. So some of the proposed entrances are right in here that would add traffic. And there's a lot of gravel road components, and this is when I say it's hilly, it's when we walk it, it's kind of scary because people coming over the roads. If we get 5 times more traffic there, it becomes a little scarier to walk that area. So.
But Dave, wouldn't the people that were living there have the same concern when your development went in?
I will.
Oh, sorry.
This gentleman did. He wasn't excited. This gentleman did. He was not excited about us moving it out there.
And these are good questions, and they're important questions and concerns to answer. And as we've talked, we want everybody to come out a winner in this. And so I just wanted to talk about a couple of those, and they're not necessarily the final answers, but some things to think about. The traffic, again, our numbers are preliminary, but they look very good. Because we have our 2 entrances on Mount Vernon and the way the streets are configured, the majority of the cars are anticipated to go to Mount Vernon. Mount Vernon has about 7,000 cars a day. It's designed to carry many more cars than that. It's a 3-lane profile, really well done, nicely done, the county and the city, whoever did that. The number is generated. You use an ITE code, Linn knows these. You put the land uses and the densities of the types of uses on the land. It's based on lots of studies. That tells you how many cars a day are going to be generated. So it's anticipated that about 3,000 cars will be added to Mount Vernon Road, which kicks it up to somewhere around 10,000.
3,000 cars.
A day. A day, not an hour. Yeah. A day.
Yeah. 3,000 just on this development.
Yeah. So that would be those 2 entrances down Mount Vernon. So the good news is at 10,000, if you work with retail developers, they will, first thing they ask is, are there 10,000 cars going by the site a day? That's their threshold. So it's reasonable to expect when the project is built out, and it will take a number of years, that we would have enough cars passing by these 2 entrances to drive some very minimal retail. And so we're showing 40,000, which is basically a restaurant's about 5,000 or 6,000. So you might have a restaurant, you might have 3 or 4 supporting shops. Maybe there's a specialty coffee shop, maybe a daycare. The market will tell us what's going to go in there. But it should support about 40,000 square feet of retail without being a burden on Mount Vernon Road. The nice thing about David Street, Squaw Creek Road, is it's protected by Squaw Creek. It would be very expensive to build a bridge over it, and it would destroy that environment. So we looked at it, but we said, no, we're not going to go there. So none of the cars go on to Squaw Creek Road, except we have a little park that has a small parking lot where people can learn about an oxbow lake and get on the trail system. And then another small percentage, it was like 15%, would anticipate going over to Dows Farm. And again, the vast majority of those people would be southbound down to Mount Vernon.
What was the percentage?
I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it was a small percentage. Well, we're going to get to a point where we have a traffic study that people can see. And they call it the modal splits, who goes right, who goes left,
Yeah,
where are they going?
I just want to point out that having lived there for 25 years, the shortcut to Glendale Mall is up Dows Road, down Abbotsford, over to Squaw Ridge Road, and then down whatever it was, close to I-100. And it's kind of an issue today, but it's not. But it is the way that people in that neighborhood go to Glendale. So that's my concern, for safety, for sure, because Dows Road is very dangerous. I mean, it's really steep.
It's steep. When it goes north of our
And
entrance,
Washington
it
High
gets
School
real
kids
steep.
use it as the jumping spot.
I can see that.
Okay, and they're going 60.
Yep.
Okay, and so I'm just, again, I am not opposed to developing this property at all. I just am very worried about whether the traffic study is being responsible to the fact that that is the shortcut.
Yes.
And as people move in there, and Dave uses that shortcut all the time. Right, comes up around Squaw Ridge Road.
I go,
You go to Squaw Ridge Road. Right, but if you're on Dows Road,
yeah, oh, yeah.
you cut through Oxford, and that's the way you go. I just want to make sure that that is highlighted
Good.
when you issue the traffic study.
Yes.
Because I think it is frankly, again, I don't care if we develop it, but I think the density is too high for what I think that traffic pattern will be.
Yes. Well, we'll definitely emphasize that. They've begun to look at it, but I'll be sure they understand.
It really isn't.
Because they've looked at the regional patterns, and they've started to form some opinions about, how do I get to employment centers, either to the south or to the west, or to the retail up off of 151.
Yes.
And so they are aware of that on an initial understanding, but I'll emphasize to them that, because I've driven that road myself, it's scenic and beautiful homes up and down and left and right. And you would not want to put high volumes and certainly not high speeds. One thing they did notice in their study is that even their study points out that there's lacks of enforcement of the speed limit. That the speed limit is, it needs to be lower and it needs to be enforced. And you can tell that from their initial studies. So.
Was that county
You
or
should
the
hear from
city?
Davey still. He's still doing this.
Well, then, what
Days.
the anchor had, the liability had on the, and I'll come back to your question, but Highway 100 was just extended out 4-lane traffic with numerous schools at Xavier level. It's seen at this place because the school system that's acquired land out there. And so we look at this as, is this viable in light of the competition that you might see on Highway 100 where there's a 4-lane road, there could be a new school. We all saw what Viola Gibson did. I mean, if you build a big will come model, and they built the school over there, and they're expanding the school already. They don't have property out here, and Erskine, McKinley, and Wash, for those, Erskine sits kind of behind True Value out on Mount Vernon Road, a little to the north. It's a tired, it's probably one of the buildings that Cedar Rapids Schools would maybe look at as they're re-engineering some of the elementary schools and rebuilding them. We looked at fire protection out here, where we're not gonna have city fire. There's a lot of housing density there, very close to the Bertram Fire truck across the street. I'm not gonna knock them, they're what we got.
Totally volunteer.
They're volunteers, they're great people, we donate heavily at their pancake breakfast. It's better than a bucket of water, but it's not anything like you would have in the city of Cedar Rapids, especially when you consider the density. Then the same thing with police protection, we're Linn County Sheriff protection. With this drive annexation, a lot of us live out in the county because we like living out in the county. The property taxes are a little cheaper. We don't pay for the police and fire protection. We don't think we need it, but our houses are also 1-acre lots. They're a little bit farther.
I really appreciate you bringing up and let's cycle back to a couple of those points. I want to be sure Frank and Bill get a chance to talk and that you have some questions.
May I ask
Yeah.
insert something here? How far afield do you think the roadways will be affected by this as far as into Cedar Rapids? I say this because I was among at least 5,000 people who signed a petition to not expand East Coast Road.
Right, yeah.
And it's a very special road.
Yes, right. And it sounds very similar to the road to the north of us that you're referencing as well. And again, these number of units are not generating the type of traffic numbers that are impacting, certainly wouldn't impact your road. And again, Mount Vernon Road has excess capacity. So it's a great way to distribute that traffic to the east and west, and they can go over the 13, they can have lots of choices. So it'd be different if we were had this density over the entire site and we had 1,000. But we're looking at the neighborhood of 300 homes. The other thing that we want to do, and this is part of our study, and I think this may answer a lot of people's concerns, is whenever you're doing a plan like this, you want to be responsible. You want to be responsible at all levels. And one level is financial sustainability. So it's not responsible for me to say, well, there's only going to be 100 houses there, because that's not a financially sustainable model. It doesn't pay for the value of the land, and it also doesn't generate enough tax revenue and other types of revenue stream to take care of all these beautiful open space systems and trails and things that we all want. So somewhere in there, there's a happy medium. And I'm pretty confident from what we know today of the value of that land, that the numbers can go down from what we've been currently showing. And I think almost everybody would say that sounds good. I just can't tell you how far down they'll go. And the other thing I can't answer, because the market needs to answer this, is as the development proceeds, and it will take 4 or 5 years, maybe longer, markets change, products become desirable, and so some of the products may shift. It may, instead of being a lot, single-family lot that's 40 feet wide, it may become a duplex, or it may become the other way, a larger single-family lot. And so some of that is in response to what the community says they need and want in their residential neighborhood.
I do think you would see traffic coming here, going to East Coast to go to Washington
Absolutely.
High School. You would see traffic coming from
Lindale,
here.
Highway 100.
Even to go to Lindale Mall, some people are gonna go this way and cut up through Jim's neighborhood, but others are gonna go there, they're gonna go East Coast because it's easier maybe.
Yeah, so that's a good, and some of these, once again, back to my initial statement, understand the facts, the goals, the needs, and then the ideas. If the facts start to say that that is indeed a significant issue, then maybe there's some ideas that start to address that. One could be that you don't have an entrance on the Dows Farm Road at all, that all traffic has to go to Mount Vernon Road, which then tends to say, oh, I'm going to stay on Mount Vernon until I get to something that's a real connection.
East Coast Road.
Maybe, I don't know, I don't know the stat. So anyway, but again, understanding the facts, understanding the goals, and how do we all achieve them so that everybody comes out with a win-win. I've been speaking too much, Frank.
Well, there was some concern over Dows Road and the safety of Dows Road. Going through the subdivision process, the city standards and the county standards would actually require that Dows Road be improved to Arts Ranch Road. So it would be improved, so it would be safer.
It would be
Well,
up
if they-
to, Frank, probably up to the property line.
Up to the property,
Not
correct.
not the entire Dows Road.
No, and not in front of the old school that was there, which is a truck terminal or whatever, but for the length of the
Yeah, and I think of it as an asphalt road, just when I drive it, but maybe it's a chip and seal, it's chip and seal, so that's why you call it gravel.
I grew up taking a bicycle up and down that road, and we called that Tickle Hill.
Well, that's a heck of a hill. The hill that everybody's talking about is right, let's go to the other side. It's right here, it's a heck of a hill, right here. Yep, and you notice we didn't want our traffic to brought it down as far south. But yes, right up in this zone is a heck of a hill.
And you just go and see if you lost your stomach.
Other questions or comments for Bill or?
Could I ask you a question?
Yeah.
And this is a bigger picture question, because as I thought about this, buying this land, this entire tract of land, this huge tract of land that they bought, I applaud the county for doing that. Because in the absence of that, the Dows would have sold it to anyone. Right? They'd have sold it to anybody that wanted to develop it. So, I mean.
You could have gotten what's on the left. Legally, they could have sold it and someone could have done
I'm
it.
saying much beyond that, because there's a much
Could've been
larger
worse.
tract.
Oh, yes, yes.
That the county has bought, that was part of the $7.1 million package, right? at the end of the day, we're gonna get, I hope, anyway, a massively larger Skogman park than what we have today.
So
And I realize that the county wants to recover at least a portion of that $7.1 million that they spent to buy all of it. Does anybody happen to know how much of that cost they want to recover? Like, is it 100% of it? Is it 20% of it? I just don't know. You know, from a funding perspective at the county level. And I don't know that, I mean, obviously you can be transparent about that because this is our money, but do you know the answer?
So I don't, and Jim, help me out if you have any additional information, but I don't know that the board has set any benchmarks for cost recovery. The proportionate cost for this 179 acres, I believe, was about 2.2 million.
Okay.
So,
I know there's a commitment from the Conservation Board towards the local option sales tax. Dennis, what is the 2 years of your?
3 million towards the overall purchase. But really, of course, that's towards the
Squaw Creek Park part of it.
And I mean, not a set in stone policy, but the assumption has kind of been during the planning is that that conservation area is it may be a $1 transaction. It's not my place to say that, but it's not anticipated being a large sale price. The farm, for the farm to be viable, what makes these small organic farms not viable is when the farmer has to take out a big loan and has a big interest payment on the land. So we would anticipate the farm to be maybe a zero cost lease arrangement, something that doesn't result in an expensive land sale transaction that comes to the county. Is a obtuse way of saying that.
So to that end, if a property owner up here, say, wanted to buy this land that was not going to be, it's not an economically viable alternative to use it for agriculture. The soil quality, the slope, I mean, it's never going to be developed fundamentally. I mean, it would be hard to develop. If the city could, or the county could recover that from a single landowner wanting to buy it at some cost that's close to the value, I mean, does it add value to this to have this, even if it's not economically, if we're losing money on it by holding on to it?
Yeah, I would say it's net neutral in terms of revenue or cost, but I do think it becomes an attractive part of the lifestyle, quality of life, the brand associated with Dows Farm, that you are living integrated with a heritage farm.
And yet, if this property owner owned it, we generate property taxes, right?
Well, if the farmer was operating it, they would pay taxes too.
Yeah, and then we would not have to maintain it. The property owner or somebody wouldn't have to maintain it. We're gonna lose money by owning it, and we would get property taxes if it was sold to a private individual. I'm just asking the question, because I think that that's an option that's been explored by at least one individual.
I think I answered the question, but maybe I didn't. But part of the value of that land is the opportunity to provide quality of life, housing options, preservation of natural environments, as well as preservation of a heritage farm. Those are all high goals overriding, as opposed to saying, well, just, you know.
and they were looking at different farm management options, but really, at this point, a central component of the overall vision for development is this small working farm producing healthy food using sustainable farming practices. So there will be value, there will be production value from the farm. We think it's a great opportunity for some educational value, that kids' classrooms can come out, learn about farm operations, learn about how food is produced, learn where their food comes from. So we think it's a great opportunity, for some possible educational partnerships. So, and I know, I think we go to 220, is that right? So
No, you got told.
250.
Oh, 250, oh.
Plenty of time.
So I don't need to be worried about time.
No.
All right, excellent. All right.
There's good with the riparian.
So I saw a hand go up. Did you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering, how is the farm and the pasture and the orchard area going to be managed? Is it going to be managed more by everyone, like a co-op, or is it specifically by the farm?
Yeah, again, we're still
Okay.
we're still exploring farm management options. I don't think a cooperative or a ownership CSA is probably not the most viable option. Some of the models out there, I don't know if you're familiar with the Sustainable Iowa Land Trust, but they hold land in a trust and then they find a farmer, a beginning farmer, to farm that land, again, based on some overriding principles. So as Dennis mentioned, one of the major barriers to new farmers or beginning farmers is the cost of land. What SILT does is they remove that barrier, they remove that cost of land to the beginning farmer. The trust allows them to build buildings as part of their farm operation, that they would own the infrastructure, but they wouldn't have that cost associated with the acquisition of land. That's just one model. Matthew 25 is another model of an urban farm. But at this point, the small working farm is a central component of the development. It really is a pretty strong piece of this vision.
How is that related to the individual houses?
Several ways, and before I answer that question, I was going to talk about the opportunity that's significant for the farm, for instance, to be part of a farm-to-table restaurant operation. So suddenly that retail area is more valuable because they have a unique product in the marketplace. They're bringing the farm-to-table restaurant services. The farm can maybe provide consulting services. Maybe it has a nursery operation. Ironically, the biggest anchor for Kansas City's market, downtown market, is the specialty seed store. Those types of things are all reinforce this notion of, we're really expanding the impact of this heritage farm on people's everyday lives. We talked about could have a small hops field. And so you could have everybody wants a designer brew pub thing. You could grow your own specialty hops right next to your brew pub. You got to be a little careful because sometimes they like to grow hops on ugly plastic things that aren't too attractive to live by. So we have to understand that too. On the individual farms, from what we've seen in other places, there's certainly a great deal of interest that even though it may not be a direct farm operation, to have community gardens. Jackson Meadow, for instance, I'm on a waiting list for next year's garden because of all the garden spots that have already been spoken for. And so that notion of sharing produce with your neighbors and being part of it, you could probably be a part of a CSA that got produce directly from the farm at a special arrangement. If you've ever done that sort of arrangement, co-op type of arrangement. Just the views alone is something valuable. So some of these lots are compact. They're the size of this neighborhood just to the west. I wish someone could tell me what this neighborhood is called. Country Club, is that a name for it? Just when you look out the front door of the club here. It looks like a very nice, desirable neighborhood. They're probably 60 to 70 foot wide lots and maybe 150 foot deep. Many of these lots would be that size. Some would even be more compact. So when you are compact, you really want that view of green as opposed to another house behind you. So the farm provides these view sheds of agricultural open space. Part of the design guidelines would say, you're not going to grow a hops field that's got ugly framework up there, and you're not going to use chemicals that may be a problem with the residents living there.
One of the things I want to add to the conversation quickly is we've talked about this at the Our Woodland Legacy Symposium in the past. We've had speakers that talk about, so you mentioned the value of views in and of themselves, but the proximity of development to green space adds monetary value to each individual unit. And I think it's worth discussing that. You look at the golf course. I heard a statistic recently that over 50% of people who live near golf courses don't golf. They're simply interested in living next to the green space. So I just want to throw out there that there's actual monetary dollar value added to these units in terms of sale price, assessed value, appraised value, because of the proximity to the open space and the fact that the conceptual design provides views and access.
I'm glad you said that. A project I was involved with, Village of Ponderosa, Linn's familiar with it. When we started off, we thought, well, how much more valuable are these lots that back up to the open space? And so we put a 20% premium. At the time, that was seen as a lot because they were $100,000 lots. Those sold out immediately, so then we upped the premium to 25% on some of the remaining lots that still could see open space, and those sold out the next. So it's good business. Open space and preservation of open space is good business. In this case, we have the natural system. We also have the farm as something that someone else is going to maintain. You're not spending money on the Parks Department maintaining it, but yet we get the economic value of looking on that open space.
Point being that the alternative design you threw up there with the, so I'm going to call it the traditional type subdivision. There was a speaker 2 or 3 years ago here who talked about the fact that that type of design likely was leaving money on the table. And this design, the conceptual design, again, you can get the same density, same number of units, higher value overall.
Lauren, hit your,
It's the same question. I was just wondering about the management of the green space.
okay. Yes, sir.
I have a comment for you and Dennis, both, and it pertains to the property north of this that you purchased. I would urge the county and the conservation board to keep that as pristine as possible. It's one that grew up on property that abutted the Dows Woods on the east side, or the west side of the road, of Squaw Ridge Road. It sickened me to see all those $1 million houses go in there and ruin what I thought was an old growth forest. And I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that the parcel that you guys bought is pretty close, as close to an old growth forest as you get around here. Mm-hmm. It's similar to the Whitworth Forest on the East Post. I'd be happy to talk to you a little bit about that, but I don't want to take away from this.
Maybe we'll come back to that before we break things.
I have a couple questions. With the riparian area, do you plan to restore that?
You know, initially, we don't have anything specific, but we think that's a terrific opportunity for some institution, organization to manage it, to enhance it. It's pretty stable right now. It did not have a lot of signs of, intense erosion. There were some areas that was cutting pretty badly. There looks like there's an old oxbow lake that maybe could be restored that we think could be really a terrific feature.
And then also for stormwater management, is there, and I understand you're still in the planning conceptual design phases, but like for each one of these residences, whether it's multifamily or single family or even a business,
yes,
do you have plans to make sure that any rainfall that hits each individual parcel, that is captured within, that none of it leaves, whether you're using pervious pavers or putting in rain gardens on multiple homes and residences? Do you have plans to do that?
Yes, and even at this stage.
And planting trees. Native trees.
That's right.
A variety of them.
Yes. Just no calories.
Ash trees.
No calories.
Yeah, no, I'm a big believer in low impact development strategies that hit that water, slow it down on site, get it in the ground table as quickly as possible.
And Bill, if I could interject, Bill made a comment about one of the challenges of the city and county working together is street design standards. One of the design, in fact, you can see it's illustrated here, but some of the design components that we're looking at are narrower streets, to reduce the amount of impervious pavement and natural drainage swales to capture slow and infiltrate
And I would
water.
imagine as well that you probably have signage planned for, for the people that do live there, or people who are just visiting. wanting to-
Educational.
Educational signage to say why this area is like this, why we're leaving this in.
That's a great idea.
That's a great comment.
Yeah.
We've not had that conversation, but I think that's a great comment because we've learned, in fact, Frank, I think maybe you learned this through Rosedale Estates, is that absent signage to explain why the grass is this tall, people tend to want to mow it. And if there's signage that explains the benefits of native landscaping or rain garden, that's a great comment.
Yeah. And even at this scale, the fact is very intentional that these green fingers that extend from the Squaw Creek up into the hillside, that's very intentional. So we don't have to pipe things in order to get them to a detention basin. We always have a green space that we can start to take surface flow. And we want to keep the quantities low and want to keep the velocities low, which means you want to get it into that green space as quickly as possible. And so these green fingers, not only are they pretty to look at, but they're also a great environmental strategy to manage that stormwater.
And maybe in your, what you were saying, when you said that like your neighborhood, everyone has the White House and the
Yeah.
pitched roof, that maybe in your plan for developers, when you put a bid out or something, that some of those things are that they have to use native landscaping.
Yeah.
You know,
It might be a
native trees.
pre-approved plant list,
Yeah.
and no branch repairs, and no burning bush. And some people go, oh, I love those. Well, I'm sorry, you want to live here, you're not going to plant those. So yeah.
Okay, so the landowners, I'm hearing, it sounds like the landowners around here would just as well see it undeveloped and maintained as a preserve mark. I mean, I guess I'd like to hear what the landowners would
That
think.
would be the ideal, or if someone wanted to buy it, put a handful of houses on it, use low density. The utility line, in my mind, create unsightly. So, often just a nature trail walking through it and riding bikes, but it's not wide. They open up a power line for the middle.
Yeah, it was a strategy, and those are good comments. I'm going to show it in a minute, or I'll show it right now. It's more visible on the traditional development pattern. You can see it running right up to the middle, and the traditional development pattern, you have all these houses lined up, and so all these people, you can see the easement because all these houses define it as they march it down along both sides. We purposely kept streets from looking at the towers when they at the end of the street, and we built these open space systems to diminish that visual impact of those towers. And yes, I suspect, this house here, which is 100 feet away from a power line, is going to have a lower priced lot than this one up here, certainly, and the marketplace will kind of dictate that. But we're not trying to force large numbers of people. We're not counting on that as part of the model. I think what's really fundamental, and we don't have an answer today, but I'm really excited to explore it, is back to David's point of where is that magic number? And where is that number that says, Post Road doesn't get impacted, that the road to the north doesn't get impacted, but it has enough numbers there that we can achieve some of these overriding goals. And I don't know what the number is yet. My undergraduate degree from Wheaton College, I'm probably the only guy who graduated there who was an economics and fine arts major. And so I love doing all these drawings are my drawings, but I also love getting the pro formas out. And I worked for a developer for 5 years running pro formas. And so running that pro forma and matching up the design, quality of life with the financial parameters to see where that magic number is that helps achieve everybody. Again, I'm a win-win type person. That's how I want to live my life.
So can I comment to Shannon's question? As a landowner that is adjacent.
And then I'll follow.
I mean, one of those $1 million houses that made so much. But we've been there a long time. And so I think in a perfect world, If somebody walked up and said, I will give you what you need for you to be happy to sell this land to me, and they did, the farmer stayed and the trucking company stayed, you know, that would be good enough, because they would probably, but, you know, I don't know at the end of the day that that person exists, and B, the county has made it clear that they want to develop this land, right? You made it clear you want to develop this land.
The county, at this point, is making it clear that it has a strong vision for the way this land develops. Let me go back to Bill's comment earlier, and David, you said a handful of houses would be great for us. Let's go back to Bill's comment that the city's plan identifies this for future urban development. Utilities are available. The county's plan identifies it for urban type development. Utilities are available. So we have this nexus of both the city's future growth plan and the county's future growth plan, both identify this for development. I asked Dennis to give it a shot. What would traditional development look like? And on the back of, in your registration packets, everybody got this handout. On the back of it, I gave Dennis some possible scenarios. What could this look like under our current land use plan and current zoning? It could look like that. Now, we know that that's the current market. We know that there's a lot of development that looks like that out there today. In terms of the overall impacts to the site, that's about 85% of the site falls under the knife for development. We just heard this morning, and these are the notes I took from Dr. Lee's comments this morning. Making the outdoors accessible to people has health benefits, right? This makes the outdoors truly accessible to every lot that's in this development. Impervious surface actually impacts the amount and location of rainfall, which impacts climate change. This concept is very consciously looking at reducing the amount of impervious surface, capturing rainfall and stormwater management on site. A 5-city study in property valuations, and Bill also talked to this, energy savings and stormwater reduction add value to real estate. All of that is part of this overall vision. So I guess as the county looks at choices for the nature of this development, the type of this development, and I've given Dennis the charge of let's look hard at those numbers. What can those numbers be, right? And still be a viable project. But the county, we don't want to alienate your neighborhood, right? We want this development to be an inviting development and asset for the entire county, including your neighborhood. So we're listening very carefully to the concerns that we're hearing. I've charged Dennis with taking a look at the numbers. We want to better understand the impacts on Dows Road, East Post Road, but I think it's worth noting that this property is slated for development, whether it's under the city's plan or under the county's plan, either one. So those impacts to Dows Road or East Post Road could happen anyway without the benefit of a small working farm, 50% of the site in conservation open space. We're trying really hard to develop a concept here that respects the values, David, that you moved out and your neighbors moved out to the country for in the first place. We think we're really getting really close to that with 75% of the site on the edges. Development's on the inside. But, the edges of the development are open space. 75% of it is either farm or open space. We're trying to recreate those values that really attracted you to rural living in the first place, and provide a range of housing opportunities for our residents. Yeah, Laura?
Well, I go back to that mix of housing solutions and that workflow in Iowa. I just haven't seen lots of those that have been like this. It helps me.
And part of Dennis's charge with his market consultant is, let's look at that. Yeah.
I can tell you from a city standpoint, that is the movement. How do you get circle of life living in neighborhoods? So this isn't just all.
From womb to tomb kind of thing.
Yes, so that you can get into a neighborhood, establish yourself, you love the neighborhood, you love your neighbors, and you want to move within that neighborhood. You go from growing up in a house to being empty nested back into that same neighborhood. So this is a very common thing that's starting to push a lot of
We've seen that
cities.
in planned communities where
They're building out the final phase of the Peninsula neighborhood down in Iowa City. So the point being is, and I'll make this very short, sorry Mark for interrupting, they're available and they're happy to talk to people down there about the price points on those homes, how it's developed, the phases over the years, that sort of thing. So that's a possibility.
One other thing to throw in there, it's interesting that real estate agents now, you see the walkability rating is a prime, so it ranks right up there with school districts. And your house value is up if it's got a high walkability rating. And this scenario on the right is has a high walkability rating.
I have two questions. I'll go with the first one first. Assuming this is going to be annexed in Cedar Rapids at some point, and is there no?
At some point, maybe. I don't know that the city has any.
We do not have any plans currently, no. So we, as I mentioned, city services are available out there. However, that exists on the development on Rosedale that Frank worked on. That's hooked up to city service. It's simply an agreement that, if the city limits move out towards you, you agree to annex voluntarily. But we don't have any plans to chase that.
Does Rosedale have fire? City fire?
So when we, when that development was occurring, Linn County has, and I've forgotten what they're called, minimum levels of service.
Yes.
And so one of the requirements from the county at that point was to ensure that the fire department could cover that, whether it's the city or whether it's Bertram Township or whomever. So there is a requirement that the developer speak with the fire department, whoever's going to provide that service, and demonstrate that it's feasible to provide that service.
What's your
Second
did
question.
Did that answer your
It did.
question?
Second question has to do with the RFP process of the developer. Issuing this out to developers, I assume, and try to specialize where you might take the front chunk that's commercial, and that might be a different RFP, different timing, maybe 2-3 years after, or other stuff. Would there be somebody from the county, like overseeing, making sure that the coordination of utility extensions go where they need to be, and versus having multiple developers going at the same time?
Yeah, I would imagine we'd have some kind of project manager that would provide oversight to that, yes.
And you're right, you'll need more rooftops before that frontage piece kicks in. And certainly the utilities are coming off of Mount Vernon, as well as, curiously enough, the Squaw Creek corridor. There's some sanitary down there. So we're going to want to be really careful how those connections go through the Squaw Creek environment when they connect.
Can I ask a really quick question? The Rosedale project, when did that start? Is it, what percentage of it is built out?
6 years? 6 years ago, plan?
Yeah, I would say not, yeah.
50% built out?
No, it's,
Just go back to my point about how quickly did this, and you already said other ones have taken over 10 to 15 years and they're still not built out. And so that goes back to that. I mean, is this going to go through a bankruptcy or 2 bankruptcies or something? Which goes back to that liability.
Sure. Well, the county owns it.
Yeah. I mean, but they're going to sell it. They're not going to give it for the developer, they have to give it to the developer at a price point that's less, and that goes back a little bit to my point of if 5 people want to go in and buy $1 million lots or something, I mean,
Back to your market question. One, where these developments get in trouble is when they invest lots of money in land purchase and infrastructure up front, and they have no means of recouping that. They don't have a cash flow because they don't have people in there, and we've seen that happen, and I've seen it firsthand. You get $3 or $4 million ahead of yourself, and you get overly optimistic, and then it fails. So one, you want to be sure that you don't do that. The advantage here is the land is sitting there without having to have a big takedown of land all at once. It can be bite sizes. And then 2, again, the whole market demand, our market study, again, the broad brush picture says this development would need to capture something like 1% of the market, potential market within its capture area. So that's not very aggressive. It's not like it's saying it's going to get 1/4 of the buyers or even 10%. It was something like 1% of the buyers. So a pretty modest expectation that would result in a fairly quick build out given today's interest rates, and that may shift. We know the market's going down. So I think as long as we're being intentional and we know what we're doing up front and where the risks are and where they're not, I think that's the key thing to manage those investments. It's not unlike your portfolio. You want it diverse, and you want to be sure you have the right risk level.
And then one quick question on the county. So at the Highway 100 and the development to the west, do they see that as this is a better opportunity than opportunities that would follow Highway 100 going west, or is this better?
What do you mean, does the county see that as a better opportunity?
Where does the city or the county see the growth? Do they see this being a higher demand location than if something was to?
The county doesn't own land the west off of West Highway 100.
As developments, if somebody were to develop 160 acres with the same number of housing units, would that offer more demand potential than this one, all things being equal? Does the city see movement directionally one part of town over another part of town?
Yeah, so from the city's perspective, we have growth areas designated on both sides. In fact, we know that Highway 100 is going to generate demand. In fact, it already is around that interchange at Edgewood. And it's starting to generate commercial demand, specifically around there in terms of residential demand. We really don't have control over, nor would it be appropriate for us to have control over where the market demands that, the residential housing to pop up. That's really up to people like Frank and other folks who are in the business. Our job as the city is to facilitate the opportunities through land use policies and those sorts of things. So, we've got opportunities on both sides, and I think from our standpoint, that's where our job ends to a certain extent, and the developers pick it up and decide, okay, where is the demand going to be? How attractive is our product? Absorption rates, all the things we're talking about. But it is a zero-sum game. There's only so many housing. Cedar Rapids has been pegged year over year at about somewhere between 1.5 to 1% population growth for a couple of decades now. So we've got a pretty good idea of what population growth is going to be. Marion's growing significantly more quickly in terms of population growth, but Cedar Rapids tends to be job-driven growth. And anyway, the point I'm making is it is a zero-sum game. So where does that end up?
The other thing too is the return on investment. It's not like that land's going to sell right. It's going to be farm. It'll be some return towards deep development.
So I understand we have 1 minute, so essentially we're out of time. So
Dennis, could I address the?
Oh, sure, Dennis.
Yes. Yeah, so a couple things we're really excited about. I'm not involved with the development piece, but we're really excited about these additions to Squaw Creek Park. So up here, that will be Squaw Creek Park, continuing all the way to Highway 100. So almost 1,000 acres of open space. As far as your question what we'll do with that southern piece is, for all practical purposes, it's going to be open space. If you go up Highway 13, Antioch Church, you look, as you're going north particularly, there's a beautiful view shed up that area. We see that as a great place for a pollinator type of prairie planting. The woodlands, we don't see much impact. Oh,
Right here.
Yeah.
Lower right.
Yeah, okay. So the view shed from here is wonderful. Coming south, it's good, but it's not as good. The woodlands, potentially some trails, that kind of thing, but here's where we're really excited. So there's a trail slated to go along Squaw Creek. You can get over to the Sac and Fox Trail. I'm not going to say how you get there because there's some options, but you're going to get into Squaw Creek Park with a trail. You're going to cross Highway 100. You're within less than a half of a mile of Grant Wood Trail. You can take the Grant Wood Trail either east or west, but if you take it west, you can end up very, very close to Rockwell, Avionics, or whatever their new name is, Rockwell Collins. And you can also end up really close to Lindale Mall. So if you're so inclined to bicycle to work, you could do that from here. If you want to hook up to the Sac and Fox Trail. This is a real key connection to a number of trails in the area. So we're excited from that. But he's got several years build out on that.
So I still want to know where's the farm? We went all around, but I just all those pictures, I didn't know where
Well,
the
I
farm
can
was.
maybe show you when we're done here, but it's along the western edge, basically. There's the farm, there's where the actual barn is, the house is. And so it's that,
It's that little piece that, it looked like a key.
and it gets bigger on the north slope of the hill north of the barn.
Let's thank our panelists. But thank you guys, it's break time. There are beverages, books, and I